Tonight's lecture is presented by the Paul Smith College Chapter of Society of American Foresters. We're pleased to welcome Professor Emeritus Michael Coot Hill. He's going to give a talk on Adirondack first growth forest. I'm not going to bore you with the details, and I'm sure that you're going to be in for a very thrilling lecture tonight. So without further ado, welcome to Mike Coot Hill, and go ahead.
Professor Emeritus does not necessarily mean without merit. It just means retired, but it's more than that. I'm still technically part of the faculty, so I have to be careful what I say because I guess I can still be fired if someone wants. I thought I'd wear this. It's appropriate. This is the first T-shirt that I ever saw that was not white, and the first T-shirt I ever saw that had some sort of a printing on it. This is Paul Smith College Earth Day, 1983. So I have more recent T-shirts, but this is the oldest one I could find. Otherwise, it's going to get too hot in here, so I don't want to keep it on any farther. So we'll get rid of it. I'll probably work up a tremendous sweat. These lectures take up more energy than the height. You want to keep that door open for ventilation? Okay. This is somewhat complicated tonight. I want to do a number of things, and I figured a 55-minute lecture is not quite adequate, and because we have no 55-minute time limit, I go on for about 70 or 75, and then if there's any discussion or questions afterward. Figuring that after about 75 minutes, even those of you who are not bored might be physically uncomfortable. Maybe in the middle of the lecture we should have a seat switch, so those who are standing can sit and those who are seated can stand. Well, see what you want to do. This is the first lecture presentation formal I've done here at the college since I left in April of 2005. And the last course I taught here was on Adirondack first growth forests. It was just 9 of us. It was a special course, just a one-time thing. I also taught one semester of forest ecology. But I used to teach dendrology here, tree identification for many years. I had forest soils, forest ecology, ground cover flora, bio for a short time. What did I leave out? The course to me that was the consummate course, the one that all the others led to and was the most enjoyable, was forest history. And I did that for the last 7 years when we had a 4-year college going, 1998 to 2005. So a little bit about my background. I want to give you an outline, a general outline of what I'm doing. So in the middle of the lecture, you won't get lost and say, where am I and where am I going? Where have I come from? I want to show you the structure. The structure is this. It's 4 pages. And it took 3 days to put this lecture together, and the map another 3. You'll see why when you see it. So this tells me where I am. I may want to refer to it. And this will tell you about where I am when we're working through it. A little bit about me. Why first growth forest? This, for the most part, not been mapped yet. No one knows where it all is. No one knows how much we have. It hasn't been mapped. I want to spend some time on the definitions between old and first growth. They're not necessarily the same thing. I'll get to that in more detail when we get to this part on old versus first. By the way, in going through my records of lectures, I have lecture outlines to just about all the lectures I did at Paul Smith's for 34 years. I found this one. This was a first growth forest lecture for the Society of American Foresters, Paul Smith College Student Chapter, September 9th, 1986. So I assume all of you were here on that lecture, was it 26 years ago, when I gave a presentation and I forgot that I had done it. And I think maybe I've learned something since. Okay, definitions. I want to do some things on definitions, on synonyms. And part of definitions, first growth excludes what it does not contain, what should not be found in it, what should be found in it. And then there are some problems with first growth, whether it is or it isn't. And I'm arriving here on why study it and why save it. And then techniques of a forest historian, how one goes about it, trying to figure out what's going on. What was that? Oh. And then first versus second growth. Second and subsequent could be third or fourth growth. Each time there's a major disturbance by people, it becomes second growth, another disturbance, third growth, and so forth. We can have all these combinations. You can have neither old growth or first growth. Wait, it's a neither nor. Wait a minute. Neither old nor first. Sorry. It's neither. You can have old growth but not first growth. You can have first growth but not old growth, and you can have forests which are both first and old. All combinations are covered. A little bit on wilderness versus first growth. What the difference? They're not necessarily the same thing. They may be, but they don't have to be. This is one of my favorites. It's on abrupt boundaries. I got some slides in there that are my favorites, and I could spend 10 minutes on each, but I won't. There's not enough time. And then the second tray are examples of first growth. Maybe about a dozen or 15 of them in the Adirondacks are first growth forest examples. I don't have pictures of all of them. We don't know where all of them are. And then finally, at the end, I've got the map. So the overhead projector goes on at the end with the map. If I need to read my notes during, I have a flashlight. I think maybe we're ready if we can get this thing. I know what I forgot. My hiking stick. It's a pointer. All right, I use a finger. I usually have my hiking stick up here as a pointer. Can we get it going, Mike? I hope it works. The setup, I came here at 1:30 this afternoon to get this thing set up in time. My apologies for having to move us, but the auditorium didn't have the screen. The screen would have been much too far from the projectors. We're using the old style projectors. The screen has to be closer. We would have needed a voice amplification system. We probably do for in here anyway. I'm going to be having a cough drop about every 7 minutes because my voice it's not loud. I have a big mouth, but I don't have a loud mouth. Okay, is that in focus? Is this the focus? Yeah. This is different from my own projector. Okay. This is the Free Science Building Auditorium, about 1978. And there's yours truly doing a lecture in dendrology, tree identification. We were speaking about cooperage, barrel making. So the lecture was about cooperage, physically in cooperage. There's the barrel, and I'm standing in the barrel lecturing about barrels and white oak group. Next. Okay. All right, here's another picture. This is some of the nonsense that used to go on here in the 70s at the college. Again, this is the auditorium. And we're talking about Christmas trees. It was just before the Christmas break. We're talking about balsam fir, and I'm disguised as a balsam fir. And, is that Doreen? I think it's Doreen, who's the provost secretary, and she's pinning an ornament on me. A number of people came in and did it, students and faculty, and then they plugged me in and I lit up. So this is the kind of thing that used to go on here in the 70s. Okay, next. Originally, I did want to mention about why first growth has not all been mapped. A little bit about me also, before I get into the material. I was able to do my PhD dissertation at Syracuse, ESF, which was in the New York State College of Forestry. Now it's ESF at Syracuse. And it was on the history of the forests of the Catskills, the high peaks of the Catskills. Because many people have been working on the Adirondacks, but my major professor and his grad students hadn't touched the Catskills. To my knowledge, there's one other student who ever did a thesis under Ed Kethledge on the Catskills, and he's sitting right here, a friend of mine. We're the only two I know of at Kethledge graduate students who worked on the Catskills. You know someone else? No. I don't, just the two of us. So then after getting my degree at ESF, and completing my dissertation on the history of the forest of the Catskills, I came here. At Paul Smith's, this would have been the fall of 1971, and stayed until 2005. And during that time, trying to figure out the forest history of as much of the Adirondacks as I possibly could. And 34 years isn't enough, so I'm back again every year, this time too, trying to map a little more, a little more, a little more, trying to fill in all these thousands of little gaps. Why is the first growth not mapped yet? Why don't we all know where it is? Well, there's several. There are about 4 or 5 reasons. Number one is there's so much of it, and some of it is inaccessible. It's hard to get to. That's one reason. Another is that there are some people who just don't have the time. It's a time-consuming thing. You can do just so much with aerial photos, but most of it has to be done on the ground. To really see things, you can do just to a certain limit with aerial photos. Third reason would be some people have not yet developed the skills to map first growth, because you need to know a lot more than a little bit about forestry. You need to know a lot about local industry, local history, and human land use history. How to recognize it is another thing. When you see it, is it or is it not? And it's not always easy. It sometimes can be just hair-raising, trying to figure out what you're trying to do. I went through some areas just in the last week or so that I'm still not sure. You've got to go back and look at it again, and again, and again. And each time you come, maybe your interpretations change. Did this. Oh, a little bit on definitions. We really want to get into definitions. Definition will be best shown by these slides. Synonyms. First growth, sometimes. Do you want the light?
No.
Oh, okay.
Can you do that? It's easier to see back here with it off light.
All right, keep it off. It's fine, because I'm famous for my underexposures, overexposures, out of focuses, and generally useless slides. Is that focused?
Yes.
Okay, well, it might be slightly out of focus from me. But some people would call first growth forest virgin forest. Sometimes you see the word primeval forest or original forest. It's basically forest that has not been used by people for any kind of economic purposes. And the examples would be following. So here's an example. You don't see this in the first growth forest. There's the old gym, the Buxton gym. Where's the new one? Well, it wasn't there yet. It was under construction. The land was being cleared of trees so that the new gym could be put up. That's Professor Gould Hoyt. He's working with his friends there and they're hauling logs. And you don't see this kind of activity on a first growth forest, simply because trees have been removed for different purposes, even the construction of the college gymnasium. Next. I don't know, can you focus that? Maybe because I'm closer to the screen, it's out of focus for me. This is a view from one of the mountains up by Santa Clara, one of the hills, and looking down is a whole network of logging roads. You won't find logging roads in the first growth forest. You shouldn't find any kind of roads. The only exception would be sometimes an old turnpike might go through a notch, through a pass, and then you have to determine whether actually there was any kind of logging or other industry going on in that pass. That happens more in the Catskills than it does in the Adirondacks. But if you see roads, it's not first growth, generally not. Next. Stumps. That's looking down at a balsam fir stump right off here, easy street. There's the pencil for scale and do ring counts and try to figure out the life history of that tree. I do this all the time. I'll stop a whole group of friends on a hike and get down on my knees with antlets and start counting. Next. This you won't see in first growth. This is a railroad grade. Brooklyn Cooperage, logging railroad, circa 1920. This is up north of here, kind of west of Beecham Lake. I do want to mention this before I take my first cough drop. I think I'm getting hoarse already. I don't know, wait a minute. How about over here? Get some light on it. This is a book. It's one of a 4-part series. Oh, you don't have to do that. Oh, but you got a chair. Are those people comfortable out here?
These two are fine. These two are coming into this.
Okay. I did a 4-part series called Mountain Railroads of New York State. And they're on the Adirondacks and on the Catskills. There are 3 volumes on the Adirondacks, 1 volume on the Catskills. The reason why we needed 3 volumes on the Adirondacks, because there were so many railroads. We got 900 pages on the Adirondacks and 300 pages in 1 volume on the Catskills. A lot of them were logging railroads. There were also mining railroads and all-purpose railroads. And one of the things in getting this series out was I had an ulterior motive, a second motive, other than just to make the rail buffs and the rail fans happy and the historians happy, where there were, oh, we can turn lights out, thanks, Don. Where you find a railroad grade, forget first growth. It's a negative relationship. So if I'm poking around the woods, mapping old railroad grades, I'm not looking for first growth, and vice versa. Next, here's a bark road. We don't have any bark roads around here in the Adirondacks, not this part. All the tanneries were around the edge of the Adirondacks, whereas in the central part where we are, there were no tanneries, so we don't have bark roads. This bark road was in the Catskills. The bark or tanning industry was a big one in the 19th century. People would fell the hemlocks and then remove the bark, and then the bark would be the product. It would be shipped to a tannery and used for making leather goods, the tanning of leather, before it could be done artificially. The hemlock bark and also to a limited extent oak and chestnut bark was used. This is a bark road of Mount Trevor in the Catskills. You're going to see bark roads in the Adirondacks around the periphery, around the edges, but not in the middle of the interior. There were never any tanneries here. The transport was too difficult. Everything was with horse and wagon and ox and wagon. This is before railroads and before highways. Next. Agriculture. Here's abandoned farmland, abandoned pasture land. This is up in Clinton County toward Clayburgh and Saranac. Not Saranac Lake, but Saranac. And this is an abandoned farmland, pasture, which, oh my, if this were forest ecology, I'd go on for a half hour on what goldenrod does to tree reproduction, but I won't go do it here. Next. If you see this in the woods, you see a lot of this in the Adirondacks, but more of it in the Catskills with the more farms. Stone wall running right through the woods. Is that in focus? I'm so close up to it.
It's not quite.
Okay. Well, I'm so close to it that my focus would be different from yours. You're not going to see stone walls in the first growth forest. That means it was pasture land. Sheep, goats, cattle, horses. Next, this is Catskills. And here's another one. You're not going to find this in the first growth forest. An old foundation, probably from a root cellar or a barn or some sort of an outbuilding for a farm. You're not going to find this in first growth. This is up in the Canate, by the way. Next. Okay, now, you're not going to find this either in first growth. This is a plantation. Plantation of red pine. It's right along, I think it's 86 now. It used to be 192. This is between the Brighton Town Hall and where the White Spine Camp Road comes in. On the south side, I took this picture about 20-some-odd years ago, and those red pines were planted probably in the 50s or 60s, and they're a lot bigger now. I have another picture that's showing this from the interior for a very different reason later. Next. I'm trying to move fast because I have a lot of material to do. And you're not going to find first growth in areas where you have mines and quarries and gravel and sand pits. This is one enormous pit. It's down by Taos. This was the great ilmenite mines. There were iron mines there in the 19th century, and the ilmenite came in during World War II. And to get a scale on this thing, these are trembling aspens coming up. To get an idea of scale, I don't know if this is in focus, that's a full-size railroad train with 60-foot covered hoppers. I'm not going into the history of each car. I mean, I might want to do that, but this would be inappropriate. If there were a bunch of rail buffs, I'd do it, but not here. But that is a regular-sized railroad train that was still hauling mine tailings out of there when I took this picture in about 1983. But if you see quarries, abandoned quarries, gravel pits, sand pits, abandoned sand pits, it's not first growth. Next. Okay, forest fires caused by people, not first growth. And this can be a little tricky because you have to determine the origin of the fire. 95% or more of forest fires in the northeastern states are caused by people. It's very rare that you have a lightning fire that does a lot of damage because usually they're accompanied by downpours, and within a few minutes and less than an acre, the fire's out. The major fires were all caused by people for any number of reasons. I don't need to get into that. This is the famous Vermontville fire. Only 21 years ago, this is 1991. I didn't take this picture because the whole area was sealed off except for firemen and police. And this was taken by a local famous photographer, Mark Kurtz. This is one of his very fine pictures. He gave me about a dozen of his best photos. So this is Vermontville fire, 1991, May. Next. And this is what it looked like there. Is Dane Grove still teaching here with Olympic Tree Service? Yeah. Dane Grove? Yeah. No. Well, Dan was a student, then he was a faculty member here. He helped out with the urban tree management. And this is what it looked like a few months after the fire. This is the fall or late summer of 1991. And you see the blackened logs. trees on the ground, and the fire cherries are coming up, and the raspberries are coming up, and the blackberries, and the wildflowers had a heyday in there. They didn't have the shade anymore. So this was a fire due to human, well, I wouldn't say carelessness. I think it was a brush fire that just got out of hand. It was hot and dry and windy, and the thing just took off. So you don't have human-caused fires in a first-growth forest. You can have lightning-caused, and again, the problem is, how do you figure out what the source of the fire was? Next. Okay, this is Coot Hill, a famous bird hawk migration site. This is near Crown, that's Crown Point, Lake Champlain, Vermont in the distance. What's the name of that bay? Oh, it has a funny name. Bulwaga, right, Bulwaga Bay. This forest, I remember going up there, and when I saw the forest, I almost forgot about the birds. Because normally I would really love to watch the migrations of the hawks and other species of birds. But there's species here of trees and shrubs that you don't normally find in the Adirondacks and other parts. There was northern red oak in here, and chestnut oak, and shagbark hickory. And it's more like the forest around Albany, or down by Kingston, or Catskill. It just didn't look like anything in the Adirondacks, except other similar places along Lake Champlain like this. It took me years to figure out what's going on here. Now I think I understand it for the whole of eastern New York. When you see oaks and hickories like this, and also associated plants, this is Native Americans. In this case, probably the Abenaki, which were Algonquin-speaking people. The effects of repeated forest fires over thousands and thousands of years will get from a spruce fir or northern hardwoods forest into a oak hickory American chestnut forest. And there are distinctive groups, associations of plants. So if you see lots of oaks and hickories, and in the southeastern Adirondacks, American chestnut, plants like sweet fern, shrubs, or what else? Mountain laurel, which I don't think is in the Adirondacks, but it is downstate. You see that as some of your plants. That's fires set by people for thousands of years, and by Europeans in more recent years. It's not first growth. It's been burned over by people who knows how many hundreds of times. There's a lot of evidence for this if you know how to find it in the literature, descriptions of actual fires in progress in the 18th century. Next slide, thanks. Okay, here's something that also is not permitted in first growth forests. This is the only picture I have of a ski slope, and it wasn't taken it wasn't taken for that purpose. The photograph's purpose was to take a picture of the trembling aspen for dendro, what it looks like in the early spring. One of the first hardwoods to leaf out. This is Mount Pisgah, part of Saranac Lake Village, and there are certain forms of recreation that do not occur in a first growth forest. Why? Well, to put in a ski slope, you have to remove the forest. And there's no greater disturbance in forest removal, like agriculture, pasture land. There are other things here I could speak about. I have another picture later. I'm talking about Mount Mackenzie a little bit later. I have a similar picture taken from the top of Mount Baker. I used to bring forest history on Mount Baker. We'd spend a whole afternoon talking about the forest history of Mount Baker and why it looks the way it does. Next. Okay, now we're getting into first growth includes what you do find it. I've been just going through cough drops. And I've been going through, I hope this thing, oh no, don't tell me, excuse me. They're old, stale cough drops, and I have as much paper in my mouth as I have cough drops. Whoops. Good, there's another scene. Is there someone waiting outside? Anybody want to sit down? We got a seat here. Yeah, come on in. Can you see? I got a flashlight for you if you want. Okay. Wait, is that mine? Get that out of your way. I have to stand because I have to move around a lot. Okay, what we did is to say what first growth does not have. So now, what does it have? What kind of disturbances can first growth have? Well, they're natural ones. They're not caused by people. You might say, well, people are part of nature. I don't want to get into that right now. Let's just say that natural disturbances are inhuman. No. A human, without people. So here is a blowdown. The most common form of natural forest disturbance is wind. And here it is on, this is a trail up Phelps Mountain. That's looking back southwest to Algonquin. I'm going up Phelps here. Wind is the most common form of natural disturbance. And you get blowdown in first growth forests? Sure. We'll get to you say, well, these trees aren't very old, those young balsams, are they? No. Are they old growth? First growth? You bet, but not old. What's a distinction? Wait. Next. Okay. Now, this is Route 86. Here are those red pines. I didn't have another good picture of what I call snow down. Instead of blow down, snow down. This is heavy, wet snow that took down a few of these red pines planted right along Route 86 here, about a mile east of the college. So you can have heavy, wet snows doing damage. Look at this one over here. It's kind of like that. I used to do famous tree impersonations in Denver. Next. Oh, this was the famous ice storm of January. What year? Anybody?
98.
98. The famous ice storm of 98. What an experience. The college was without power for 3.5 days. Dr. Miller had postponed classes for a whole week. Oh, actually, he didn't need to, but who knew that the power would be out for only 3.5 days, and we were the lucky ones. And to watch this and to see the aftermath and which species of trees would be affected in different ways by the ice. Some hardly at all, some really devastated, some just damaged slightly. These are primarily aspens up on Anchota. I had forest history coming out there looking at ice damage for quite a few years after. Next. So we can have ice. We can have landslides. Here's Mount Trevor. I suspect, and I've heard that there were many new landslides due to the hurricanes last August 28th, I think it was, Hurricane Irene. But Mount Trevor has had a history of repeated landslides. You've got them all over the place. They're more common in the Adirondacks than they are in the Catskills, but we have them in both regions. So landslides are natural disturbances. Is this first growth forest, this young stuff that's coming in on the old side, wherever there's some soil? Sure. Next. You can have floods. This is the Rocket River. Down, it's between Axton and Tupper Lake. And Corey's and Tupper Lake. This is high water and silver maple population. I've just read that somebody interpreted this silver maple stand as it may be first growth. I haven't checked it out, hadn't thought of it, but it may very well be. But floods are allowed in first growth, except you're not going to find floods up halfway up a mountainside, just on the major river bottoms. Next. The reverse is droughts. You're going to have drought disturbances. I remember a few falls bringing dendro up Creighton Hill here, and everything on these ledges was crisp. The soils were just a few inches deep, and the plants couldn't get enough water because the soils were so shallow that they were drying out. This picture's out by Horseshoe Pond, Hitchens Pond, Horseshoe Lake area. It's a similar idea. The trees were doing better because they have deeper root systems, the soils are deeper. But you can have droughts affecting these shallow-rooted species quite readily. So droughts are acceptable in a first growth forest as well as floods. Next. Lightning set fires. Shane Eversfield, a former student, gave me this picture because I didn't have any of lightning. Next. And here is this pine still here? It was right off the Bluebird Road just before you crossed, Willow Brook. It was on the right. Is that tree still there? I haven't been there in a few years. It's just down the road here a little bit. And this, I used to bring forest history out there, try to have them figure out what happened and when. They'd be out there scratching their heads, trying to reconstruct what was going on. I tried to guide them through, trying to figure out. In forest history, everything had to do with time span, how old, how long ago, how soon, that kind of thing. Here's a lightning strike. It didn't set this tree on fire, but it did damage it. So you can have lightning damage in first growth. Next, please. This person here is kind of what you might call a pig, although not biologically. I mean, some of them eat out of house and home. Can you have deer browse in a first growth forest? The heavy deer browse, I have another picture later. Yes, yes, it's a native species like the deer. Yeah, it's still first growth. This was first growth, by the way. Next, more about that later. Can you have beavers in first growth? Yep, here are two alumni. Whoops. I don't think either of them graduated. Here we have two potential alumni. And they're having a little bit of a problem here with the canoe because the beavers have been busy. Next. And you know who this is? This is the Viva Lodge. And this was up, it was up by somewhere off Rainbow Lake, I think we went there to take a look at this. Is that a cedar forest? And that's a large, might be some cedars back in there. Threw that out of focus because I was focusing on the Beaver Lodge. Can you have beaver effects in first growth forest? Oh yeah. In the Adirondacks and in the Catskills. Yes, you can have beavers. Next. And they, of course, they can really do a big job on a lowland forest along a stream. They can kill the trees. Of course, it comes back after the beavers abandon the lodge and the dam and the floodwaters go down. But next to people, beavers can do the most disruption of the forest. Where's Ken? I think you're in the picture, Ken. Here. This is on Catamount Mountain. It was a hike, and the trail goes up to this basalt dike. I don't remember if it's a northern up there. I think it's sort of a cyanitic gneiss. But there is a basalt dike which weathers out, and there are certain forms of recreation that can go in a first growth forest, and that's perfectly acceptable, like hunting and fishing and hiking and camping. Those don't really affect the forest, usually not much if people are careful. So here's a bunch of hikers. The only problem with Catamount Mountain here is that it burned over. But if this were on first growth, the hiking would certainly be permissible in first growth. Next, here's another recreational activity, and this may very well be first growth. This is that stand of silver maple along the Racket River below Accident Quarries going on down toward Tucker Lake. And I've just read that some people do think this silver maple stand is first growth. I never really thought about it, but it might be. But here's certainly a recreation form that will still keep it first growth, unlike the ski slope, which removes the forest. This doesn't. Next. Now, here is a native caterpillar. This is forest tent caterpillar. We have eastern tent caterpillar, which mostly feeds on prunus, cherries, and plums. But this is a maple, especially sugar maple devourer. There was a big forest tent caterpillar outbreak in the Catskills in 2006, 2008. They were just all over the place. They really defoliated, mostly sugar maples, but they were defoliating other species as well. And here there's a little pencil for scale. They were swimming all over this boulder on Mount Trevor in the Catskills. This is a native insect. And downstate in the Catskills, it peaks every, I don't know how many years, 15, 20, maybe more. And it really can devour the forest, the leaves. And it wouldn't affect, if this were in a first growth forest, it would still be a first growth forest. I consider it because it's a native insect. Next. Here is what it did. If you look at the, it should be green down there. Is that focused on? Maybe. Well, I must have focused on the background. Sorry. This is Mount Trevor in the Catskills, about 2006, 2007. If you look at the underbrush, it's green. Summertime. Look at the forest. What time of year? Probably late June. Shouldn't they be in leaf? Yeah, where are the leaves? Inside the forest tent caterpillars. So this is not a first growth stand. It happens that Mount Trevor is very much disturbed. But if this were a first growth stand, a native caterpillar devouring the leaves would still keep it first growth. This is not first growth, but has nothing to do with caterpillars. Next. Here's a view from Mount Trevor. I'm trying to work fast so I can get done by about 8:15, 8:20. This is a view of the defoliation from Mount Trevor. You can see way up, I can't point, way up there on these hillsides, it's all gray. It should be green. This is middle end of June. Into July, shouldn't be that color. Huge portions of the hillsides defoliated by forest tent caterpillar. The epidemic is interesting, how it spread to the west and fanned out, but that's a whole other story. But it's a native insect, so the forests that are first growth and affected by this are still first growth. That's my definition. Next. Now what happens if the insect is not native? Well, then we got a problem. Here's a gypsy moth. That's not quite clear. That's a European. There's a forest tent caterpillar. I thought I had an eastern tent in here. I guess I don't. Oh, it's another one. There's a gypsy moth. That's not native. If you have a gypsy moth infestation, then what do you do? And it comes into a first growth forest. That would be very rare. The reason is gypsy moth, which is Eurasian, primarily feeds on oaks. It also attacks aspens and other trees. And when you have a lot of oaks and aspens, it's probably not first growth in the first place. But if the gypsy moth should get into a first growth forest and defoliate it, I don't know that ever happened. Whether I'd call it a first growth forest anymore because it's not a native. Those are the things where you begin to really wonder about definitions and where you're really not sure. Next. Here's gypsy moth, defoliation on an oak forest. This is in Palinville, New York. In the Hudson Valley at the base of the Catskills Escarpment. Here's a bunch of historians ready to ascend the mountain to do a history hike. And I took this picture because a lot of oaks and hickories up in there are defoliated by gypsy moth. But These are not first growth forests at all, but has nothing to do with the gypsy moth infestation. They're not first growth because of thousands of years of Native Americans, probably the Esopus people, maybe some of the Mohicans burning away almost every year or so. Next. Here, what do you do with beech bark disease? This is first growth forest up on Montauk Mountain in the Catskills. And most of the old beeches are gone, the sprouts are coming up. Now, you've got a complex of organisms, of scale insects, and of fungi. Some of them are European, some of them are native. When I used to teach this in forest ecology, I remember which is which. Honestly, I've forgotten. I know some of you people know well. But what do you do with beech bark disease? This is first growth forest. Is it no longer first growth because some of the organisms causing this beech bark disease are not native? Does this become not first growth? I'm not sure. These are some of the real headaches that a forest historian would try to resolve, and a lot of it has to do with definitions. Next, what do you allow and what don't you allow? Okay, if this is acid rain, acid precipitation problem on red spruce, on ester mountain, off a whiteface, what do you do with acid precipitation? It's caused indirectly by, well, I guess caused more directly by people. So, but it spreads from areas from second growth to first. In other words, the acid precipitation effects don't really abide by the rules between first and second growth forests. They can go from one into the other. The higher elevations of Ester Mountain are first growth, the lower elevations are second growth for a number of reasons. But what do you do with red spruce and other species that are being affected by acid precipitation? Is it no longer first growth? In fact, it's a human disturbance, but it's not deliberate and it's done not directly. But these are some of the problems that we have to work with. I think I had, yeah, questionable first growth. I put it under that because you're not really sure. Is it first growth or is it next? Okay, why save first growth? Why map it and why save it in the first place? Several reasons why it could be saved, and if you want to save it, you've got to know where it is to map it. Some people say, well, who cares? Well, some people say, we do care. It depends, and everything in between. There are several reasons. I can give you some off the top of my head. I think I have them all listed there, or many of them, but I'll give you what I can. One reason is arts, for the arts. There are people who are inspired by first growth, also old growth forests. This happens not to be first growth, but I have a picture of some people up in here painting. There are artists, painters, and they're painting scenery. This is an abandoned rock quarry in the Catskills. There are also people who, for the art's sake, are building all kinds of monuments out of the waste stone slabs. So if you have people going into a first growth forest, some people do it for artistic purposes. They're somehow inspired by the fact that the forest has been untouched. And you can have painters, photographers, musicians, writers, philosophers, a lot of the arts people. That's one reason. Next, see what I have here. This, to me, is the closest and the main reason why I'm interested in first growth is for education and for scientific research. There are other reasons. There are people who, let me mention this in just a moment, people will go into first growth very often for spiritual reasons, almost religious reasons, or maybe religious reasons. People who live in large urban areas and suburban areas and want to get out to a forest for peace and quiet, and the fact that it's a first growth forest and it's never been commercially utilized or cleared by people, maybe it's a source of inspiration. So it's almost a philosophical reason for going in. And as I said, almost a religious reason. There are other reasons. First growth forests are rare, they're uncommon. And one of the comments I get sometimes is, what did the forest look like 300 or 400 years ago before Europeans settled the Adirondacks? Well, that's easy. Some people say, what did it look like? What did it look like before we had people of European descent here? And many parts of the Adirondacks were untouched by Native Americans as well, or barely. What did it look like? Easy. Go to first growth. You got it. It's here. It's not all gone. It's still here. And there's plenty of it. We don't know how much. But that's an easy question. People in the Catskills say, where can we go to see original forest? Pre-settlement forest, pre-human settlement forest. Well, I'll send you up any of these mountains where there's first growth. Go look for yourself. It's still here. Anyway, this is education. This is our first crop of EET students. They came in the fall of 1973. The environmental and ecology program was created by Professor Patricia Flath. And the first class came in the fall of '73, and here we are out in summer '74. They had a summer block program. These people graduated in '75, the first group of EETs, and they're looking at chipmunk burrows. They're working in a first growth forest, looking and following what chipmunks are doing in relation to soils. I don't want to get into the soils effects of our relationships and so forth. So education, bringing classes out to see it, informal and formal, bringing groups out to see first growth forest. Next, I think the next one is, okay, I did want to mention the research part of it as well as the education. This is my forest soils class. Mid-1980s. We're out on the tongue in the first growth. This I'll talk to you about this tree later. This was the biggest hemlock I'd ever seen in the Adirondacks. It's gone. It died of natural causes and it's down on the ground. But more about that later. But it's also scientific research. A first growth forest, if you can call it simple, is simpler than one which used to be a farm, or used to be clear cut, or used to be a quarry. Any kind of elimination of human activities makes the forest simpler. I didn't say simple. Forests alone, without human beings, are so complicated, they're just mind-boggling what's going on in a first growth forest. And if you've got the human activities historically on top of that, it's doubly mind-boggling. So I always like to look at first growth forest. It's like a biological control in a laboratory. You have a control where you do nothing to the material, and then you do various treatments and see what the difference is. Well, the first growth is really a natural biological control, but it's out in the woods. It's not in the laboratory. And you can compare first growth, non-humanly used forest with humanly used, or second, third growth forest, and you can see differences. Next. Okay, here we are out at the tongue. This is research and education. Students out there, this is the big hemlock that had come down on its own. We wanted to find out how old it was, so we brought the chainsaw out there. By the way, I looked at the date on my slide, and there's quite a bit of snow. This was 1995 or 6, about April 21st to 22nd. This time of year. Next. This time of year. Here's more education and research. This is bog coring. This is a good Adirondack discovery. We're out in Ford's Bog, and we're looking at peat samples and pulling fossils out of the bogs. This is, I think he's retired now, DEC Forest Ranger Gary Lee. And this is a black spruce tamarack bog. This is first growth, but more about that later. So research and education, to me, are the most important parts of first growth. But to other people, they prefer the philosophy, the arts, the rarity. They want to bring their kids and their grandkids in to see what the forest used to look like. Next. Okay, now, I think the next is techniques of the forest historian. Techniques, I'm watching my clock, hope to be done in 25, 30 minutes. Techniques of the forest historian. After 40 years plus of mapping first growth in the Catskills and Adirondacks, one gets a little bit experience in what to look for and what not to. And I thought I'd show you some of the techniques. It would take a whole course to teach them all. And here is, well, here I am. My first semester at Paul Smith's. This is late September 1971. And this is my first class, taken by a friend through a window in Saranac Lake. We walk on the streets. We used to bring him into town to see the ornamentals as well as the trees around here. Lots of ornamentals in Saranac Lake. So one thing is, this is dendrology. You've got to know your trees and your plants. And if you're working with the wildlife and the zoology, you've got to know those too. If you're working with fungi. That's why identification of the organisms you're working with is extremely important. So that if you're working with trees and forests, you just don't misidentify your tree. And hopefully if you're working with wildlife, you don't misidentify the animal or the fungus if you're working. It takes a while, it takes time to get to know these organisms. But identification is extremely important. I don't want to get in detail, but on forest history, I remember one student did not have the prerequisite dendro course and misidentified a tree, and on a quiz it changed the whole idea of the forest history because the species were confused because they were so ecologically different. So don't misidentify if you can help it. You'll misidentify on occasion, but you try to keep it down. Next, you don't want to do many. Field work. A lot of field work, running around in the woods, taking measurements and studying the forest. A lot of exploring is done in the field, but not all of it. So you've got identification, you've got field work, techniques of the forest historian. Next. Personal memory. Here's more of the ice storm, 1998. This is Route 3 out past Vermontville. Personal memory and field notes, field notes, field notes. Keep records, keep field notes from your field trips. So not only do you know where you were and what you saw, but the dates are very important when you're reconstructing history. When did something happen? Hopefully all my slides have dates on them, as well as locations and what the subject is. And they can be indexed all different ways, by dates, or by a location, or by subject. So I remember the ice storm when I was out looking at it a few days after it occurred in January of 1998, and I have some field notes on it and some photographs. So one's memory is important. Next. And, oh, I just like that photo with the eastern white pines and the ice on it before it melted. Next. Okay, here's another way, techniques of the forest historians. Oral interviews. Talking to people, hiking with people, interviewing people who know a lot more than you do. Here I am as a graduate student. I'm coming down a mountain in the Catskills with a friend of mine, Ed West. Ed West was superintendent of land acquisition for the state of New York. He was retired when I first met him. He had worked his way up from a surveyor up to superintendent of land acquisition. He knew the Catskills better than anybody else. And in a sense, he was my informal mentor. And Kethledge was for the Adirondacks, Ed West was for the Catskills, where I was doing my thesis. Local people, especially senior citizens, but not necessarily so, people who have experienced and have records and know a lot of stuff and can look things up and have pretty accurate dates in their head and what things happen. So oral interviews from people, extremely important. Next, and this is just as important, old maps going into a library. If you get the maps, if they're scanned in the computer, that's fine as long as you can read it. I have a collection of old maps at home. This map, I don't want to get into details, but this is the blue line of the Adirondacks as of 1891. It was just a preliminary map. If you know the blue line, the Adirondack Park didn't come in until 1892. They were first drawing this. This is an original map. I've got it. I use it for teaching in forest history. Old maps give you a tremendous a bit of information, not only on the forest, but also on industrial history. Do I have any pictures of books? No. Books, especially old books. I just was going through looking for something else the other night, looking up for a friend on the record, largest red spruce in the state of New York, and I found out something that I hadn't planned on, and I was delighted. I found out when J&J Rogers were logging around Adirondack Lodge, 1897. I was trying to get the date and stumbled on it accidentally. More about J&J a little later. But old books, old maps. In order to know an area well, to map the history of the forest, you've got to know something about the industrial history. Logging companies, paper companies, lumber companies, different kinds of mills, agricultural products, bedrock products, quarries, gravel pits, sand pits. You need to know the industrial history of an area quite well. Who is doing what, where, at what time. Then you know where the first growth is not, and you can focus in on where it is. Next. Mistakes. Watching my clock. How far am I along in here? Still here. We're moving. I might run 5 or 10 minutes over. I know you're uncomfortable because it's hot and you're getting stiff staying in the city. But I'm moving as fast as I can. But there's an awful lot of material. This is a whole course jammed into 70 minutes, basically. Eastern hemlock, interpretation, misinterpretation, reinterpretation. Are you sure? Go back in the woods. A second time, a third time, a fourth time. Were your first impressions right or wrong? I originally interpreted this as a first growth forest of hemlock in the Catskills for many years. Even wrote it up, and then I realized later there's a bark road going into it. Uh-oh, I found a bark road later, which means the tanners had been up there. Now these trees are getting into be old growth, but that's another definition. They're getting old enough to be old growth, but it's not first growth because they had been removed for tan bark in the 19th century, and these trees have grown back since the last 150, 170 years. Next. Okay, I think we're First versus second and subsequent growth. Good, we're in part number 5 of a 7-part lecture, so we're getting there. We're getting there. This is first growth. Cancel. I'm rushing, so I'm making a mistake. If you're rushing, you'll make a mistake. This is neither first growth nor old growth. You can have this first growth, old growth. They're not necessarily the same thing. They may be, they may not be. This would be first growth and not first growth and not old growth. It's simply aspens and eastern white pines coming up in an abandoned lawn or abandoned pasture. Next. Here's neither first nor old. These are forests, a lot of aspens and gray birch, maybe look some red maple there, coming up on the mine dumps over by Port Henry, Mineville, Mariah. So the forests here were heavily disturbed, primarily for charcoal, cut over for charcoal, and then used as fuel for the steel industry, the iron industry. So this is not first growth, and it's not old growth, at least not yet. It's got a long way to go, the young tree. So neither first nor old. Next. Okay. Paul Smith's College sugar bush in the early 70s. This is what it looked like. A number of you were out there. I was out there last Saturday for the alumni pancake breakfast, and this is what it looked like. Is that in focus, Mike? This is what it looked like in the early 70s when I first came here. This sugar bush at Paul Smith's is one of my prime examples of an old growth stand that is not first growth. Next. Old but not first. Here's more what it looks like today. This was taken just a few years before I left. So the building's been changed, they electrified it, there are more outbuildings. Can you go back with that?
Yeah.
Okay. This would be an ideal situation for 2 projectors, 2 screens, 2 slides side by side now and then, but we can't really do it here. So this is, this is going on almost 40 years ago. Next, Mike. And this is recent. But this stand, okay, well that's fine.
Which one?
Well, you can move on one more. This stand of sugar maples is old growth, but it's not first growth. It's old because the trees are old. Right now they're 210, 220. I remember doing counts in the 80s. They were up around 180, 190, so they're over 200 now, many of them. And they're old enough. You might say, well, how old is old? For me, about 150 years, and there are other forest historians would agree on it, but for probably different reasons. It's not a clear-cut off. But approximately 150 years, these trees are over 200. Sugar maples don't live too much longer than that. 250, 300 might be an absolute maximum. And the reason why it's not first growth is because you've had a lot of silvicultural thinning in here. First to remove other species of trees that would compete with the sugar maple, and by competition would cut down on the sugar content and the vigor of the trees that were remaining. So a number have been removed. And probably some sugar maples that were no longer producing, they were getting old or injured, they would be removed out of there to give the more productive trees more light, more room, more water, more nutrients, and they would produce more sap. So this is certainly not a first growth forest, but it is old growth. Next. Here's another picture of the sugar bush. This is a more recent photo. You'll find a lot of stumps back there, which are great for me, because I'd be going back up there and doing ring counts. It was quite an opportunity to scroll around on your hands and knees and do ring counts. Next. Here's Dan Groves, former student who used to teach urban tree management. You say he's not here anymore. He runs a Lincoln tree service. And these are some big northern red oaks that he brought me to in Keene Valley. And these are certainly old oaks, but they're not first growth because for all these oaks, they've come in on forests that have been heavily cut over, in some forests probably even pastured at one time. I'm not sure about this site. So this is getting old, but it's not first growth. It had been utilized and altered by people in the past. Next. Okay, here's Dr. Recklin, an alumnus of this college. Mike Recklin, who was head of the forestry divisions for a number of years. Here's the student. What's the name? A lot of you people remember Mike Recklin. Okay, well I see him every summer here I come up. This is in the Algonquin, Mount Algonquin. We used to bring our EET students up there, environmental tech students up every year to look at the Arctic alpine tundra on the top of Algonquin. And this picture shows first growth forest. First growth balsam fir. But they're not old, no. Balsam fir generally don't get more than people do. An old balsam is 80, 90, 100 years old, 110. and these are probably mostly less than that, and they're stunted. It's a first growth forest. J&J Rogers was never up this high. They came up only to roughly maybe 3,800 to 4,000 feet. Here we're getting into timberline, we're up maybe 4,600, 4,700. This is first growth forest. Many of the summits, not all, but many of the summits in the Adirondacks and the Catskills are first growth, and many of them have the stunted balsam fir kernholz up there. It's still first growth. No one's ever cut it down for pulpwood, and no one's ever cleared it for pasture, and no one's ever put a quarry in up there, or any other cleared for a house. Next. So it's first growth, but it's not old. Here's more first, but not old. These kids are a bunch of old, grouchy, retired people by now. I took this picture years ago. This is on Mackenzie Mountain, and these are normal-sized, 10, 11-year-old boys, and they're not giants. I mean, these aren't kids 50 feet tall in front of balsams that are 60 feet tall. You can tell by the size of the balsams they're all stunted. But this part of Mackenzie and on north and east is first growth forest, and yet it's not old because balsam firs just don't get old. Next. Okay, here's Tim Chick, who teaches several courses out here. Tim couldn't be here tonight. I remember he used to come in my forest ecology course and talk about allelopathy, or the way he pronounces it, allelopathy. But Tim is an expert on that, and he used to come and he has taught, still does, teach courses here at the college. This is out the boardwalk at the Vic, and this is a first growth, probably not old growth forest, open black spruce and tamarack, right here at the Interpretive Center, just a mile and a half north of here. Many of these boggy muskegs of black spruce and tamarack are first growth, but not necessarily old. Some of these trees may be older than you think they are because they grow very slowly under such conditions. Some of these smaller black spruces could be 100 years. The larches a little bit younger. But most of these trees aren't that old, but it's certainly first growth. I don't ever remember anyone going out there and trying to harvest any of that stuff. It's just too small. For pulp, it's not worth it. They get the skid of bog down in the peat, and you need a big bog coring device to pull it out of there. Next. Here's Spring Pond Bog out north of Tupper Lake. And this is by, it's west of Kildare and Derrick. West of Derrick and north of Tupper Lake. This is one of the biggest bogs in the Adirondacks. Massawinky Mire might even be bigger. And it's hardly a forest, although you do have some black spruce and tamarack. But this is pretty much first growth. Next, it's not old. There's not much forest there. But what's out there, I can't believe that any of that forest had been used for anything. It's just too small. And they probably don't get very old. It's pretty harsh growing conditions. So this would be first growth, but not old growth. As opposed to our college sugar bush, which is old growth, but not first growth. Next, how about, okay, good. Here's yours truly on, that Sugarloaf Mountain in the Catskills. And you come up a ledge, this is all first growth. You come up on a ledge, and the soils are very thin over here over the bedrock. It's quite exposed to wind and ice and snow, and the forest is perpetually young. The trees just can't get old. They get beaten down, they get pushed over by ice and snow, wind, and drought situations. So you got pioneers in here. There's red cherry, fire cherry, Pinus pennsylvanica. You might have mountain ash mixed in here and some paper birch and mountain paper birch, maybe a few scrubby yellow birch. And it's first growth forest, but it's not old. It can't get old. The trees just can't make it there. So they'll live for 12, 20, 30, 40 years and then succumb and new ones take their place. Next, you get another similar situation like this, but this has some balsam fir and spruce in it. This is on Twin Mountain in the Catskills. What's that? Looks like a bird flew by and dropped something, but I'm not sure exactly what that is. It's in the film. It's not part of the photo. But this is first growth, and there I am, botanizing. And it's not old growth, but it's first. So people say, oh, first growth forest, giant trees, 500 years old. It doesn't have to be. Next. Okay, now we're getting the first and old, both together. And this is the pines off Easy Street, which have been called Elder's Grove recently by one fellow. We never really had a name for it before. We just called it the pines off Easy Street. This is just a mile and a half from here east. And these are first and old. Next, and we know how old. I didn't have a person with me that day. This is my 6-foot rule, and there's my hat. And for scale, a straw hat and a sombrero up there, because I didn't have anyone with me that day, but the picture came out clear. So these are two of the pines out there. The pines are running now about 335 years old, and they're on their last legs. We're losing 1 or 2 every year. But it's first growth and old growth. We've pretty well worked out the history of the site. We have almost all the trees measured. I got to go back there and take one diameter. I'm missing in one data sheet. So this is first and old. Next. Okay, this is looking up those trunks. These trees are anywhere from 120 to 160 feet tall, diameters ranging up to almost 5 feet. Not all of them are that big. And they're all about the same age. They're all started about the same time. From what I call the Great Blowdown of 1675. All right, you say it was 1677 to 1674. Yes, okay, next. We got it down within about 5 years. Oh, now we're getting into some good stuff. It has to do with, we did neither old nor first, old but not first but not old, both first and old. Oh, I forgot to mention, one of the problems why we don't have the first growth mapped in the Adirondacks is not only because there's so much of it, and some people may not know how to recognize it, and all those kinds of things. It takes a lot of time. One reason has to do with the fact that a lot of people are mapping old growth and not first growth, and not making the distinction. And that's one of the problems you'll see in my map at the very end, what that is. That's a problem of definitions. Some people equate the two. Some people don't make the distinction. Old growth simply has to do with the old trees, big trees, without much consideration of the history of the site, whereas first growth takes care of and considers the history of the site. Okay, wilderness, I'm over here. I'm getting along here, so we're getting there. And I'm just about barely an hour into it, so I'm on time. Stop complaining. First growth. Wilderness and first growth are not necessarily the same thing. And they're certainly not the same as a cough drop, which is totally different. Here's Mackenzie Mountain. This is one of my favorite pictures for educational purposes. Oh, sorry. This is taken from the summit of Mount Baker, looking east, just outside of Saranac Lake. This is Haystack, that's Mackenzie, Moose would be behind it, and Whiteface behind that. You're looking east over, Lake Placid Lake would be over the ridge. That would probably be the Sentinel Range off there in the east. What you see here, here's red maple. You see all the red crowns and orange crowns, those are a lot of maples. Sugar maple, and especially red. You can see they go this far and they quit. And then above that, it looks kind of gray. That is mostly yellow birch, and at the upper limits, paper birch, and maybe some mountain paper birch. And then you see this is spruce and fir. And what it is, if you climb up the trail up Mackenzie from the south, from Raybrook, you'll go through this forest of birch, and there are spruce and fir, but they're all young ones. They're coming in underneath the birch, but not the other way around, because the birch are less shade tolerant than the spruce and fir. When you get up in here, you have spruce and fir in the canopy. They're full-grown trees as well as the young ones in addition. What this is a burn line. This is 1908, September. That's the 1908 fire. This whole area burned, whereas this part up here where the spruce fir remains intact did not burn. This is first growth in the spruce fir. This area is second or third growth, probably second because it had burned. And the fires in 1908 were, for almost all of them, set by people, directly or more indirectly. That is carelessness rather than arson. The great majority were carelessness, things getting out of hand. But what you have here is the Mackenzie Mountain Wilderness area, which goes all the way over to Moose Mountain, over toward Whiteface. And I've been doing quite a bit of mapping on that in detail from all my field notes and books. Just recently been studying this range. This whole thing is pretty much one wilderness area, but wilderness does not necessarily mean first growth. Wilderness is more of a human emotional kind of thing. When you're in an area that doesn't seem to have any human structures and much human activity going on, we call it wilderness. And it's regardless of the history. You can have wilderness areas in first growth, you can have wilderness areas in second growth. This is a wilderness area. This part burned in 1908, second growth. This is a wilderness part of the wilderness area. It's in first growth because it didn't burn and was never cleared for agriculture. Heaven forbid up there, putting a farm, or quarried, getting a quarry right up there, or even logged for pulp and paper up there. So wilderness is not necessarily first growth. You have to be careful. The definition of wilderness is usually on the degree of human use. and it usually thinks about the present and the future, whereas first growth looks at the history of the site. So it's a different way of looking at things, and a lot of the people who are looking at big trees in the Adirondacks, the real big ones, the old ones, the tall ones, the fat ones, the old ones, they may be looking for old growth, and not necessarily for first growth, or not really knowing how to separate the two, or not caring. That's not true for all of them. Some of them are working on whether the old growth or the wilderness is first growth or not. Next. Oh yeah. Oh, these are two slides coming up that, oh, I could go on for 45 minutes on each, but I won't. I remember sitting in during an Adirondack Mountain Club lecture once, and a fellow was showing slides of his hikes in the high peaks, and okay, this slide went on the screen, and I just gasped. And I said, the people sitting there, what's the matter with you, Mike? Well, look at that line. Can you see it? Look at that line. It's a straight line. That's not a problem with the film or the camera. That's real. You can trace that on the ground. And I said, I got to get a picture. So I spoke to the guest lecturer. How do you get a copy of the slide? And he made one for me. That's great. I knew what it was then, but I know more detail now. That is a land use history line. That is a lot line. You plot the topography up against a DEC, New York State Adirondack map, the Adirondack land map. It shows the state lands and the private lands, and you've got a line connecting, separating lots going right up there. This is running north about 6 degrees west. For those of you who are surveyors, you may wonder why it's off 6 degrees. I used to teach that in forest history. That's fun, but don't go into it now. There's no time. But this is the north 6 degree west line. And this is first growth. This is Big Slide Mountain. Is that Yard? Yard Mountain, Big Slide. You're going down over the Brothers down toward King Valley. This is the Johnsbrook Valley down here. Johnsbrook Lodge is down in there, and there's a ranger station. This is first growth. There's the line. This is second growth. A lot of birch and hardwoods came in following the harvesting of the spruce and fir. This, in the high peaks, is J&J Rogers. James and John Rogers. When you're working a lot in the eastern Adirondacks, you've got to know something about J&J Rogers and their pulp mill in the Sable Forks. And I've been trying to work out the dates on where they were logging. They were over here on Whiteface Mountain on the east side. They were here. They were at Heart Lake, Adirondack Lodge. They were here in Johnsbrook. This is about 1922 they were working in here. I've been doing a lot of reading on it. Things like this to the forest historian may go unnoticed to a general observer, but to a forest historian, you kind of just stand there and your jaw drops. What is that? Next. Now, here's another one. All I can tell you is about where it is. Here's this line. You see that? It's going up like this. Now, how do you know that there's a line there? Because the forest on this side is different from the forest on that side. The forest on this side, the texture is coarser. If you're a painter, if you're an artist, you would see the texture, or perhaps a fabric maker. The texture is coarser. Here it's finer. What that means is these trees are older. They have larger crowns. They're bigger. So the forest surface looks rough from the air, from an airplane. This forest has younger trees, smaller crowns, and it's finer texture. This is the county line between Herkimer and St. Lawrence. Now I know that Herkimer is on the right and St. Lawrence is on the left. The reason is, this is part of the first growth wilderness, Five Ponds Wilderness Area, which is the largest first growth area in New York State and probably in the Northeast. I'm not sure about Great Smoky Mountains. There's a lot of first growth down in there, but certainly in the Northeast, and without question, in New York State, the largest first growth area. There's a whole history on that. You could spend a lecture on the Five Ponds Wilderness. This area in Herkimer County is first growth, and the part in St. Lawrence County is second or third growth. So which way are you looking? If this is Herkimer and that's St. Lawrence, the line is going east-west here. But are you looking east or are you looking west? Ah, see, you have to know your history. The Five Ponds Wilderness Area, the first growth is on the south side. So you're looking east. Now, exactly where along in here, I'm not sure. I've got to pull out my maps that show something and look compared to this photo and look at aerial photos to try to match up the wetlands and such. Because there were many logging railroads 5 of them came into this part of St. Lawrence County, running parallel to the county line and stopping just a few miles apart. I didn't want to enumerate, they're in volume 1 of the series, but I'll tell you, knowing where logging railroads went and where logging companies and pulp paper companies and mining companies were active, I tell you that's an enormous boon to figuring out the forest history, because you know where it is, you know where it is not. You don't look for it here, you look for it there. Next. We're getting on. Is that the end?
Yep.
Oh, we're almost. We got the other tray, but it's not full. Right, please? Not full. You want to get up and stretch? We got 3-minute break.
If you open those windows,
Yeah, open the window.
blinds, then the air will circulate.
Wait, you gotta go in. It's full. You gotta go all the way to 80.
Mike, was that Richie's company?
Yeah. Yes, in part. That was one of the 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the 5.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to go through these fast. And then we got the maps. If you got to leave, leave. We'll be done in about 12 minutes. One little. Wait a minute, please. It's got to go all the way. Okay. Good. Okay. Bye, please. Sorry for this conflict. We didn't think we'd have more than 20 or 30 people. So we will said, let's move people up here. So I never believed that this would happen here. It never happened when I was teaching. Crowds like this. People be running out. Examples of some first growth forests in the Adirondacks. We'll go through them fast. Locations, what they look like. This is on the tongue. Here's Professor Hoyt. And he's looking at the biggest hemlock that I've ever seen in the Adirondacks. It's not the biggest hemlock everywhere. But this tree came down about 1990. Oh, in the mid-90s. It was about 47 inches in diameter, 46, almost 4 feet. When I saw that thing the first time, I thought it was a pine, eastern white pine. I'd never seen a hemlock that big. Well, it was a hemlock. Next. So this, we have first growth on the tongue. This is on the Mackenzie Mountain Range. This is a little pond called Loch Bonnie. That's Moose Mountain up the top. You're coming up the trail from Lake Placid Lake. Much of the whole ridgeline of Mackenzie and Moose, almost all the way over to Whiteface, except on the eastern side of Whiteface is first growth. You're high enough here, 2,900 feet, that the forest is almost all red spruce, balsam fir, paper birch. You might be right at the upper limits of yellow birch, but the sugar maple, beech, northern hardwoods are below you. Next. This is the flow at Rainbow Lake, first growth, eastern white pine. I was in there about a year or two before I left here. I think I was able to get by some broken ring counts, broken trunks, about 250 years old. So they're old and first, at least 30 back. Next. Some of these places are accessible only by canoe or by kayak. That's another reason why people haven't mapped at all. This is inside that pine stand. Next. This is Buck Hill, which is just off College Lands on State Forest Reserve, not far from here, up toward Rainbow Lake. Buck Hill has a stand of first growth, old growth sugar maple, unlike our sugar bush, which is old growth but not first. This is ice storm damage from the, but it's still first growth. But here on Buck Hill, there's a whole stretch of first growth going from Route 30 east all the way almost down to Mount Monongah and Munchai. Next, that's first growth. This is the Jenkins Notch, one of my favorite places. I used to bring forest history out there. This is the fall. There's the Bar Mountain. I think that's Baldface or something. You're looking north. Jenkins is on the left. This notch is just a small area of first growth. This side of it was Paul Smith's hotel lands, college lands, been logged. In the notch itself is first growth. And when you go to the north side of the notch, it's still state land, but it had been burned over. And then the CCC was in there putting in white spruce plantations. So just a little patch in that notch. Next, not that far from here. This is a black spruce tamarack muskeg. It's just, you have bogs like this. You go down Route 30 a mile on the east, you find it. Go out 86, just opposite where the White Pine Camp Road comes in. Get these black spruce stands. And I think that most of them in the Adirondacks are first growth. At least around here at Paul Smith's, I don't remember in the years I've been here, or some of the old timers talking about people going in there and pulling this little poles out for pulp. I don't think anyone's ever worked in there. And many of these big black spruce bogs, especially in the northern Adirondack, I think are still in first growth. There's no evidence of any kind of human activity except Mike Kutish bringing his forest history class in there, or a biology lab, or an EET lab. Next. What is that? Something like a white-throated sparrow. Who's got the recording? Or is it a real one? Oh, okay, here's more. I used to have arguments over with Barbara McMartin, who was a very famous Adirondack historian. She didn't think that these black spruce bogs and muskegs were first growth. I think they are. I think most of them are. And they're kind of overlooked because people think of high and dry. They don't think of these wetlands as being first growth, but I think most of them are. Next, we're moving fast. There's a lot of first growth around the east and south base of St. Regis Mountain. The college is up here in the haze. This is St. Regis Mountain taken from a plane. You're looking around the southeast base of it, and there's a lot. What is there? Fish Pond and Sunday Pond, St. Regis Pond, Little Lawn Pond. You can name some of the others if you've been out there in a boat, but a lot of that area is first growth. Next. Here's Little Long Pond, first growth. Here's St. Regis Mountain, part of the slopes of it. You're looking at the southeast end. A lot of these old eastern white pines along the shore and first growth forest behind them. Next. More first growth. I kind of like that cloud. It looks like cottage cheese with pineapple juice on it. Next. Here's the last course I taught here at the college had to do with mapping first growth in the Adirondacks. And we went out to off the Floodwood Road, around Pollywog Pond, and over by Rollins Pond Campground. There's a lot of first growth. I was just in there yesterday in this area doing some mapping. And we found this old yellow birch with a burl on it. Next. And this is off Forest Home Road. There's a patch of old first growth and old growth that comes right up to Forest Home Road. I passed by it yesterday to try to get the mileage distance along the highway of just how extensive it is. And it goes south toward Boot Bay Mountain and Shingle Bay Mountain. Not far from here, very easily accessible. Next. Okay, this is the Kildare Club. There's not much first growth in private lands. Our college has some. But you don't find much first growth on private lands. Most is on state forest preserve. But the Kildare Club and some other private organizations, very often families that own estates for decades and decades and maybe centuries, keep portions of their lands as first growth, as preserves. Next. And there's quite a bit of acreage on the Kildare Club, Kildare Preserve. I was out here with an ARCH group, which is Adirondack Architectural Heritage. They had a group coming out there to see the buildings, and I wanted to see more than the buildings. This area here is first growth and old growth. The problem is they've got excessive deer populations. A lot of the stuff coming in is hay-scented fern, which the deer won't eat, and they're really doing a job on the tree reproduction. Both the deer and the fern, both. Next. Here's more. These ferns are getting really too thick. There's my hat for scale. Some big old yellow birches. So this is first growth, old growth, and it's on private land. Kildare Club. Next. This is the best picture I had of Five Ponds Wilderness. It's taken from a high rail around the Adirondack Scenic Railroad, and you're going across the Stillwater Reservoir, and to the north of the Stillwater Reservoir is the Five Ponds Wilderness, the largest first growth tract in New York State, probably in the Northeast. This part, right along the railroad, obviously was not. But the history of the Five Ponds Wilderness and the first growth is tied in very closely with the railroad. But I'm not going to get into that here. That's a whole other lecture. Next. This is looking up Nippletop Mountain. I think over from, it's east of St. Hubert's and south, maybe from Dial Mountain, up in the Dix Range. And look at all the fine texture here. Look at all that. Very fine. You wouldn't feel it very bumpy if you were to run your hands over those tree crowns. That's an old burn. I'm not sure of the year. In this area here with the larger, older trees, it's not a burn. So first growth and second growth. Next. In the high peaks. Okay, this is something I'm really pushing because I want to spend at least 3 minutes on the map. This dark area here, I can't reach it, I'm not tall enough. This dark area here, just above Phelps Brook. There's Heart Lake, Adirondack Lodge. I'm standing on top of Mount Joe. There's the whale stand. You're going up Algonquin. There's Mount Cold and Marcy in the background. And that's a stand that J&J Rogers did not get to. I've been studying J&J Rogers, James and John Rogers. By the way, one of their great-grandson or so was a student here of mine, Jamie Rogers, years back. And then he became the mayor of Lake Placid. I don't know if Jamie still is. But J&J Rogers, with their great big pulp and paper mills at the Sable Forks, did a massive pulp and paper cut here in the high peaks. 1897 on through the 1920s, they got into a Whiteface Mountain area. And to understand the high peaks, the history, and portions of Whiteface and the Sentinel Range, you've got to know about J&J. Next. That area they left alone. This is what it looks like inside, it's underexposed. But this is the first growth thing. It's near the Phelps Brook lean-to. Is that lean-to still there?
No.
No, okay. Well, there's the Phelps Brook lean-to on the way up Mount Marcy. You go up the Mount Oldenburg Trail. Next. This is Basin Mountain from the Shorey shortcut, which isn't the shortcut, but this is all first growth. I don't think J&J ever got up in there. Most of the high elevations, above 3,500, 4,000 feet. Most, not all, are first growth. Next. And of course, stunted fir toward the top. This is all first growth. But it's just too inaccessible, and they could have gotten much more economically useful pulp lower down. Next. Oh, this is all by 8th Lake. There's a tract of first growth, some big old and first growth pines. This is Route 28 going down toward Inlet, and I explored the other side of the road and found that it's a good hemlock, spruce, northern hardwoods first growth. It's on both sides of the highway, not just on the side under the pines. Next. I think that may be my last slide. This is a big first growth forest just outside a campground, Louis Lake Campground, between Indian Lake and Speculator. And I was in here with these people, this fellow's friend of mine, and he said, we got some big trees down there, Mike, you want to check this place out? We did this in 2006, and I was amazed to find old growth right in the campground, and as soon as you got out of the campground, it transferred over to first growth. And that whole area in there, there's a lot of it in that part of the Adirondacks. No railroads. I think that's it. Let's see. Okay, lights on, one map, and we're done. And I'm running over, because I got that big map. Let me just show you this. How do you turn this thing on? I have my own overhead. Oh, good. Okay. Now, all right, good sneeze. We can keep the lights on this way. What I did is I made map on paper and then was able to get a Xerox machine, a copy of that would take a paper map and make a plastic map out of it, thanks to the Catskill Forest Association, of which I'm a member in the Catskills where I live. What I did was to compile, this took a few days, of as much of the reported first and old growth as possible and plot it on the map. And we don't know the extent of many of these areas. We just don't know. Here's Five Ponds Wilderness. I'm really suspicious about this part on the southeast end of it. I think that may be first growth. It has to be field checked. There's no reason why it shouldn't be, but I don't know. Here's the high peaks. You can see all these places in white and gray. That's where J&J Rogers was working in the northern high peaks. The southern high peaks is Finch Pine Paper Company. You got to study Finch Pine to study this area. When you get down further south, of course, you get international paper. You got to know where they were and what they were doing. Paul Smith's a lot of little areas up in Paul Smith's, little portions, some of them only a few acres to a few tens of acres. Jenkins Mountain. Here's this big tract north of here that goes from Mountain Pond all the way over to almost the Mountain Inaga. This is Easy Street. You've got some of these big bog muskegs. You've got the famous Ampersand Mountain first growth stand that's right along the highway. The highway goes right through it, Route 3. Here's the Mackenzie Range, goes over to Whiteface. And notice a lot of them, especially in the southern Adirondacks, have question marks. And that's the reason for that is because they were reported as old growth. They were reported as old growth, lots of areas, that's what all those green dots are. And they have to be field checked, and the history is analyzed to figure out if they are indeed old and first, or just old. So there are a lot of questions. I tallied up the number of individual dots, green dots on this map, some of which are first growth, and as I said, some may not. I came up with about 60 some odd. I did a hasty tally. Now I know darn well there are probably well over 100 of them in the Adirondacks that are first growth. In the Catskills, we have about half 100. The area down there is about 1/4 the size of the Adirondacks. I've mapped almost all the first growth in the Catskills. It's easy for one person to do in a lifetime because you have less area to work with. So I've got that mapped. There are about 100 square miles of, which would be about 60-some-odd thousand acres, I think, of first growth in the Catskills. Now in the Adirondacks, people are throwing numbers around. No one knows. No one's mapped it all. I think it's going to take an army of specially trained people to go in there and map it using aerial photos, historical documents, and on the ground to figure out how much we have. What I'm aiming to do eventually is to try to train people. If I can get a book out on, it'll be a manual on how to do it, or at least how to try to do it. And, well, let's see, Ed Kethledge thought there might be 200,000 acres of first growth. And Barbara McMartin thought it might be 500,000. Now the park is 5,900,000. So if Barbara McMartin I figure if 500,000 is correct, you got about 8 or 9% of the park is first growth. If that Catledge's percentage of 200,000 acres, that would be only maybe 3 or so % of the park. But for the Catskills and for the Adirondacks, I think it's somewhere between 5 and 10% of both parks, and probably similar for both. So these areas need to be checked. Some of them, I think, could be connected. For example, I've seen first growth on Chimney Mountain. I haven't been to this part of the Siamese. I came in from this end, didn't find any first growth going into Siamese Ponds from the east, but the Wilderness area has some, and it's west of this county line. I'm wondering whether this is continuous. And I'm thinking maybe this is continuous from Squaw Mountain all the way down to Stellar Mountain on the Snowy Mountain Range. And there are other places that I think may be continuous. But you have to get in there to see, to check it. Maybe they're not, maybe they are. They might be interrupted by sections of second growth. So I think this is just about it. The blue line is not blue on this map. I didn't want to color anything. Oh, you'll notice I didn't go east to Lake Champlain. Forget most of the Champlain Valley. You've got all the iron mines and the charcoal burning, and there wouldn't be much first growth in the eastern part. The closer you get to Lake Champlain, the less you'll think about first growth. Most of it, I'm almost done, running over, way over. Most of it, as Barbara McMartin says, is in the southern and central part of the park and not in the northern. And she thought the reason is there wasn't as much red spruce, and red spruce was the primary tree. I think that's part of it, because knowing how red spruce migrated into the Catskills, I'm not surprised that it migrated in the Adirondacks in a similar fashion, hit or miss, but not uniform. But I think it's more than that. In the southern part of the park, guess what? An absence of railroads. And with that, I'll shut up. Dinner time?
Where's the oldest tree you know of in the Adirondacks?
Well, there's some 300-year-old hemlock. The one that came down on the tongue was not quite 300, but we found one. There was a stump that was. The stump was along a power line at certain camps up on Spitfire Lake. I think we got 300 rings on it.
Do you think there's any over in ampersand?
300?
Yeah.
I don't know why not. There should be. I was in there with Jim Allen in his advanced silviculture course, and some of them might be. 300s are hard to find. Most don't make it that long. But you do get a few. Red spruce, maybe one. Yellow birch and sugar maple, maybe 250. Eastern white pine can get over 300. We have them here. There are individual accounts of various workers finding really old trees, but they're the exceptions. They're not the rules. I mean, they're just records, just record breakers. But most trees don't get over 250, 300, maybe 350 is about the limit. I mean, we're not dealing with coast redwoods or giant sequoias. But Ampersand Mountain, yeah, good candidate, because there's a lot of old growth and first growth there. You have to go look. And since you can't cut the trees down, you have to look for those that have already come down. You can't bring some broken limbs and broken trunks and so forth. Yes?
Would you say something about the difference in forest structure between old growth and first growth?
The structure?
Well, how do you tell if a forest has been allowed to regenerate for 200 years, what's the difference between that and a first growth?
Okay, that would be very uncommon in New York State. That would be common in New England, where settlement was much earlier and farms were abandoned. You can have 200-year-old trees plus in parts of New England that are second growth because it had been a farm or cleared or cut 200 years ago or more. In New York State, in the Catskills and the Adirondacks, that doesn't happen. It would be extraordinarily rare because of the late settlement and the abandonment of the time of abandonment of farms and the timing of the logging operations and the pulping operations and the mining. To find a 200-year-old second growth forest in New York State would be very unlikely. New England, yeah. But in the Catskills or Adirondacks. This area here was settled in 1850s and 1860s. Where I live, the valley was settled about 1820, 1810, which is not quite 200, but it was first opened at that time. It wouldn't have been abandoned until the late 1800s at the very earliest. So we don't have any 200-year-old second-growth forests in New York State. New York State was settled too late for that. That's basically what it amounts to. See, you've got to know something about the human history as well as the forest history to make sense out of any of it. Yeah.
Well, you know, let's take the example of that 200-year-old secondary growth forest that's recovered. Do you say it's biologically inferior to first growth? I mean, you know.
Boy, depend on the situation. If the first growth forest is removed, say for agriculture, for pasture land, if you need to go. If a first growth forest has been, say, cut over for pasture land originally, and then the pasture is abandoned, the species that come back are not always the species that were there before the clearing. For a selective logging, it wouldn't make that much difference. For a high grading, it wouldn't have that much of an effect. But if you really clear cut it like a pasture, there are many species of ground cover plants and shrubs that I have not yet to revegetate abandoned pastures in the Catskills, and I think that would work here for the Adirondacks I have to work on. There's certain species that won't come back, or at least have not come back in 100 or 110 years. So it may be the same, you may have the same species, but you also may not. It depends on every abandoned field, every clear cut will be different. Some plants will easily come, and I'm thinking of ground cover plants and trees, easily come in under pine plantations and easily come in on abandoned fields, and there are others that just won't. Whether it's a mycorrhizal fungus or the whole life cycle, I don't know what it is. I'm looking at it now in the Catskills. There's been work done on it in New England, but I haven't really had a chance to read that yet. Because in New England, the farms have been abandoned a lot earlier. Some of them. Yeah.
Mike, thank you for coming up. Looking at the park as a whole, and recognizing that perhaps 90% of it was disturbed, what observation would you make about the differences in species over the park as a whole? In other words, we have, generally speaking, more softwoods and hardwood?
For areas that were cut for spruce, either spruce lumber or spruce and fir pulp, we had a lot of conifers. Most of what came in following the cutting was a lot of pioneer hardwoods, like paper birch and tumbling aspen and maybe yellow birch and mountain ash and fire cherry. And some of those species have already reached maturity and are dying out. Some of them are reaching old age, some of them are gone, some of them are still here. And the spruce fir might come back in. That happens quite commonly. If an area, say, were cut for pulping, spruce and fir are out, hardwoods come in, and then surrounding areas that were not cut, or individual trees that were not cut, will come in and start coming in, so you have spruce and fir coming into the birch and the poplar and the aspen. So some of it might revert back to pretty much what it would look like, but if you've got to wait for it to reach maturity, it might be 125, 150 years. So it depends, but Kethledge my former professor used to mention how areas that had been burned over and cut over heavily, well, for conifers, for spruce and fir, especially for spruce, came back as hardwoods. But that was a while back, and now some of these hardwood forests are slowly reverting back to spruce and fir, not all of them. It depends what was there first. It was cut over for northern hardwood, sugar maple, beech, black cherry. Probably go through a pioneer stage and it might come back, sugar maple, beech, black cherry, yellow birch. Depends on the site and the history and what was removed and how much. So you'd have to almost look at each site individually. They can all differ from each other. That's why forest history is a tremendous headache. Don't get into it. Very complicated, very simple. You try to make sense out of this and sometimes you're just ready to give up.
You have much of this in the book?
Forest History of the Catskills. It's called the Catskill Forest History, published Purple Mountain Press, 2000, out of print. My friends have been begging me to put out a second edition. I don't know I have time For the Adirondacks, I'm working with a publisher now to get a first growth book out on the Adirondacks. That would go into this and all the details and all the techniques and a lot of the examples. The problem is it hasn't been accepted yet, and it may or may not be. If it's not accepted, then I will have to try another publisher. I'm working on it already. In fact,
Is a map?
well, yeah, well, this is a generalized map, which probably be, when it's done professionally, would be the beginning of the book as a general map for the region. And then there would be highly detailed maps of individuals.
Are there any available?
There's a lot of material published on it, very few maps. You'll get, there are a number of people who've studied these first growth and old growth tracts. I have a lot of literature at home. I'm plowing through it now, some of it for the first time. But as I said, a lot of people are looking at old growth, and there are a lot of people who enjoy looking at old trees simply because they're big. They're running around in the woods, they're trying to find the fattest tree, the tallest tree, the oldest tree, and the history isn't of such interest to them. Although some people it is. So, yeah, I'm trying to get a book together now. The only thing is I have to find a publisher because my existing publisher is retiring. And I wore them out with 4 of these. 1,200 pages, 8 years, 90 some odd chapters. No. What's that? What are you doing? Oh,
Mike,
yeah.
have any chestnuts survived?
Yeah, American Chestnut Association, there's a whole group of people working on genetics and raising chestnuts. I know some friends in the Catskills who are active with that, trying to plant different genetic crosses and back crosses so that you have the advantages of the American chestnut and the disease resistant of the Chinese. It's taken many, many years and many generations, but you'd have to reach people in this chestnut society. There are branches in different parts of the state. I know one fellow, Sherritt Chase in the Catskills, a friend of mine who's been working on that. But as far as the native distribution of the American chestnut in the Adirondacks, very limited, primarily in the Lake George area, because it follows the Native Americans and their forest fires. And the interior of the Adirondacks were not burned, so you don't have the, or very rarely burned, so you don't have the Native Americans, you don't have all the forest fires, you don't have the oaks and chestnuts. Parents would come to me on Parents' Weekend and say, why don't you have any oaks around here? I said, well, we didn't burn. You must have burned. So we didn't burn here. So the oaks are rather far and few between. So chestnuts are tied in very much with forest fires. Oaks, hickories, pitch pine, mountain laurel. Not always, but probably 90% of the time. So we never had chestnut here. I've seen it down around Thurman and Lake George area. There would be sprouts coming in. Yeah.
Based on your estimates of the amounts of first growth and old growth, do you have a sense for how that compares to other places across the globe in terms of this type of forest?
No. Believe me, I have enough headache with New York State to last me 10 lifetimes. No, I don't. I don't even know how much is in the Great Smokies, which is supposedly one of the largest tracts in the east. How much is in northern Maine? Where's Matt? Is there a lot of first growth in northern Maine?
Yeah, there's quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, Big Reed.
Anybody did a census of tally?
I don't think across the entire area, but I know there's been work done in Big Reed. It's a forest preserve there.
Okay. No, I'm sorry, I just don't know. I have enough headaches with New York State alone, trying to figure the Catskills and the Adirondacks out. You can spend 100 lifetimes on them and still not figure it out. Yeah, I know.
The blowdown is 1675.
Yeah.
Where did that documentation come from?
Ring counts. Oh, you mean, where did the date come from, or why? How do we know it's a blowdown? Or both? Oh my. I used to bring forest history out there. Yeah, you can work forest laws. Okay, ring counts. I originally quoted the Great Blowdown of 1685 until an alumnus had corrected me with the cross-section leaning pine, which used to be in the old library. They did a very careful count of the rings, and I said I was a little bit older. I was a little off, so I changed it to 1675, plus or minus 5 years. And we have ring counts from some of the trees that have fallen since out on Easy Street, counting stumps and ring counts for those that don't have heart rot. And they're all about the same age. They all go back to about 1680, 1675. Now, why blowdown? One reason is it's the most common disturbance. That's not enough of a reason. That's a guess. That would be the most likely reason, but it's more than that. You'll find You have nurse logs. You might have a log growing down this. No, you don't have the nurse log, it's not there anymore. But you find the pines growing up in a line, or two, or three or four in a line. And the roots kind of spreading out as if they had been established on a nurse log, which is really rotted. So there must have been something on the ground there to get these pines going up and high to see, because they're very often you find them in 3s and 4s in a straight line, like you have them. Oh, you have them in Washington State, the Olympic Peninsula. What do they call them there? Nurse logs? They have them in the
Nurse log.
nurse logs. And the trees grow in rows where there was a nurse log that had rotted out. So that is good evidence for a windfall. Now, could have been a lightning fire? Yeah. Could have been an ice storm? Yes. Could have been snow, heavy wet snow? Sure. But if you think of the last 150 years of written records here, 100 years, how many blowdowns have we had compared to severe ice storms and snowstorms? The blowdowns have it. So it's the most likely cause. But I wasn't here in 1680, so sorry, I don't know for sure. It's the best guess we can do. But there is evidence. But if you want to say, am I absolutely sure it was a blowdown? No. Am I absolutely sure it was 1680? Within 5 years, yes.
Do you know how extensive it was? I mean, do you have any sense
Yes.
of the size?
Yes, yes. It was right here on campus. Yeah, because there's still some remaining pines that are still around. And you used to see old photos of the Paul Smith's College. Well, it wasn't even the college, it was the hotel. And you get these pines out on the point, and you call Picnic Pine. Do you still call it Lydia Martin Smith Dome? There are a whole bunch of them. And on the hill above Lydia Martin Smith, the hill right across here, there were big pines up there. You still see a few stumps up there. Some of them came down naturally, some of them were cut down. But they were on campus. There's still one up there off the Keys Mills Road, right behind that brand new dome that was put up. There was an old water cistern up there at the top of the hill. There's still one there. There are a few north and east of the college. They're still there. They were there when I was teaching here. North of, what's the name? Not St. John's in the Wilderness. What's the other church here on Orphan 3? Just north of that. The trail that goes over toward Osgood Pond and Church Pond, and you go north on the east side of Route 30, on the east side of Route 30 going north. What's the church right here? It's the Catholic church. Just north of that, and the trails are going toward Church Pond from there. It used to be called the Red Dot Trail years ago. There are some left in there, or were, and they were scattered around, primarily north and east of Lower St. Regis Lake. This place on Easy Street is a little bit odd because it's so far removed, about a mile from the lake. And most eastern white pine stands are generated, native eastern white pine stands are generated by blowdowns along the margins of lakes, especially on the east sides, northeast and southeast. This one on Easy Street is a little unusual because it's about a mile inland. And I think the trees are all pretty much about the same age. But you have multiple blowdowns. The blowdown up by Rainbow Lake was, the trees are only about 250 years old, so that was a later one. It's not all one blowdown all the same year. And you probably, if you go to the Adirondacks, go back 12,000 years, you probably have hundreds and hundreds of blowdowns and hundreds of places getting eastern white pine regenerated. Because the natural distribution of eastern white pine in the Adirondacks before humans is pretty much around the lakes, where you get the most blowdown effects and the greatest winds. Also on any kind of south or west facing slopes where the wind could really take them off. Yeah.
When you count the rings, do you core them?
Oh, Jane, hi.
Hi. Do you core the blowdowns or do you slice them into cookies?
Don't normally do either. What I normally do is, if someone cuts a stump for me, that's great. I just crawl on my hands and knees and do ring counts.
Yeah.
But most of the trees I use, especially in forest preserve, in areas where you can't cut a tree down, cut on a stump, is I look for broken trunks, broken trees that have broken off in a storm, and jagged ends, if you can get to them, or pieces of branches or limbs down on the ground, do counts off of those. Very often you have heart rot, so you can't get to the center, you got to estimate it. And that's a tricky thing to do, because if you're assuming the same growth rate over the whole life of the tree, that's usually an error. It speeds up, it slows down, it speeds up, it slows down. So that can be tricky. But you try to do as best you can by broken limbs and broken trunks and take ring counts. So if I have a fresh trunk that just broke down, And so I'm crawling around trying to get dates on that. Increment borer is another way. I used to use it for teaching, showing people how to use an increment borer, but I use that only for teaching. I never really use them myself. I like to see a whole tree. I like to see a good section of the trunk, rather than just one little dowel of wood. You can see a lot more from a whole cross-section, or a chunk of cross-section, than you can from a little increment coring. Excuse me for those of you who love increment borers. I like them too, but I find it's, to do forest history, you gotta look at the whole trunk. You see a lot more.
So you cut it off clean?
I don't cut it. I try to get the break.
I
don't cut
I
it.
mean, the jagged edge?
The jagged edge, yeah, you try to do the best you can. In a few years, it'll be covered by lichens and mosses, and sometimes you have to kind of brush it off. And very often, if you're looking at a tree trunk, you may have to, you can probably count so far into here, and then this part you got to come in on a different radius, and then come in on a different radius, because part of it is rotten and obscured by mosses or liverworts. And sometimes you have to try to figure out the ring of the same age and run around the other side of the log or the trunk, and then count in from the other direction. All kinds of things. Yeah.
Mike, did you say that around Speculator that there was a campground that was first growth?
Yeah, Louis Lake Campground. It's right on Route 30. It straddles Route 30. It's between Indian Lake and Speculator. There's quite a bit of first growth. Most of it's on the west side of the highway, but there's some on the east side. On state land between the campground and, it's the south bay of Indian Lake. I think it's where the Jessup, near where the Jessup River flows into Indian Lake. There's quite a bit on the east side of the campground. And also, if you go west of it, there's a Suckerbook Trail that heads west from the campground, goes over toward West Canada Lakes in that direction. And I got onto that Suckerbook Trail, and within a tenth of a mile I was in first growth, right off Route 30. So a lot of it down there.
When those trees pass on, that's no longer first growth?
Sure it is.
With
Yeah.
the campground there?
Oh, well, right in the campground, no, it wouldn't be first growth, but around the edge of it is first growth. Not in the campground, surely not, because some trees have been removed to put in the campsites and the roads. But not in the campground, but just outside of it. As soon as you get within 100 yards of 100 feet away from the campsites and the roads, you're in first growth. That's not that unusual. Fish Creek Ponds. You go, what, a tenth of a mile north of Fish Creek Ponds Campground, which is a city in the summer, and you go in first growth. We were mapping that last year in part, in previous years. So some of the first growth is right outside of campgrounds. In the Catskills, Monbrook Pond State Campground, you just go out of that, 2 Pennsylvania in first growth. Cross the line into Ulster County, you're in first growth. That's what happens in campgrounds. Not in them, but right around them. So you always worry about forest fires and campfires in the first growth. You always worry about it. Mike, can you formally close it?
Yeah, might as well.
Oh, thanks. Thank you so much for the projection assistance. Much appreciated.
Thanks everybody for coming, and hope you enjoyed your lecture as much as I did.
It's sleep time.
Yeah. Safe travel.